All right, welcome everyone to the Biotech Network's virtual event. We're going to be in this session talking about inclusion in biotech. So I know some of you are still joining, so I'll be going through the introductions and the housekeeping. So please introduce yourself in the chat on the right. So there are different chats here in Hopin. There's a stage chat and an event chat. So if you want to talk to people in general at the event, introduce yourself there. If you want to introduce yourself here on the stage, use the stage chat. And then on the left, you'll see what's live. So of course you're at the stage now, so you've clicked on that, so you know that the stage is live. And then also, if you go to the reception, you'll see the link to download the presentation, which I've always also put in the chat here. And there are also some things about resources, as well as some of the terms that we'll be using during this presentation. So you're here on the stage. Currently, we also have speed networking available. And so that's, I know some of you are dialing in from all over the US, maybe even other countries, and maybe it's late at night. So, you know, if you'd like to do speed networking, of course, we'd love to have you here, but we wanted to have that as an option for everyone. And then right after this panel from 4 to 6, for those of you who can make it, we'll also be having video, group video chat. So it's similar to a Zoom, and we have different topics for each session, and you can see those here below. And it's pertaining to what we're talking about during this panel, and then also if you're just interested in general networking with people from different regions. Right, just a little bit about Biotech Networks. So we've been around since 2008, started in San Diego, and as you can see, we've moved up and down the West Coast, and then we're also establishing ourselves on the East Coast. So we're really excited about that. And in the fall of last year, I went to Boston, checked out a bunch of breweries, because that's where I like to hold our events, had high hopes, and then the different letters of the Greek alphabet came and made me rethink having in-person events. And, you know, I really decided that there's so much uncertainty about networking and events that we are committed to having monthly events all through 2022 so that you can connect with others. So we're going to have events like this with speed networking and panels and presentations. And then we're also doing career fairs, and our next career fair is February 10th. So just to dive into diversity and inclusion, or D&I or DEI, which you'll hear us talk about today. DEI stands for diversity, equality, and inclusion, and some people put equity instead of equality. And that's something, if you're interested in it, you can Google it. It's quite an interesting distinction. So the Biotechnology Innovation Organization came out with a report in 2021. And they found that they did a survey, and they found that women are 47% of the biotech workforce, but only 31% of executives. And if you go to the C-level, it goes even lower than that. For Black professionals, they are only 7% of the workforce and 3% of executives. And Latinx are 4% of the workforce and executives. And, you know, you can look at the statistics. This is much lower than the population. So, and you know, what happens is at every step, as you're an employee, that you move up the chain, there's an attrition. And so at the very highest levels, there is the biggest effect. And, you know, I didn't introduce myself. I have a background in biochemistry and marketing and communications, and I've also worked in diversity and inclusion. So I have studied this quite a bit. The good news from this survey is that 70% of those surveyed, the biotech companies, say D&I is a goal for their organization. And you can probably guess the bad news is that only 24% of companies have career development programs for women and 18% for people of color. And so, as I mentioned, as you go up from entry level up into C-level, that's really important to have career development so that you don't have that attrition happening. And then only 39% have diversity and inclusion goals for leaders. So it's important for leaders to consider diversity and inclusion and equity in their everyday activities, their hiring, etc. So this is important. And today we're going to be talking about what happens at a company level, but also individuals. And so you have a voice, even if you're not in senior management, et cetera, even if you're not currently managing a team. And a link to this is in the link I provided in the chat. So just to give you some examples of these things, this lack of inclusion that happens that results in this inequity in the highest levels or even mid-levels. So during interviews and hiring, there can be issues with recruiting. For example, some companies state that they'll only take from, let's say, Ivy League schools. And so there's an automatic bias because the historically excluded groups aren't at a high percentage in general for these institutions. There can be bias during interviewing. Unconscious bias is a whole, you can find all sorts of great resources on the internet about unconscious bias, and also accessibility. And we'll be talking about that as well, especially with COVID and being able to do interviews remotely. Then you can be excluded or underrepresented at meetings or events. I know of a local biotech that used to have golf outings, and of course, everyone can play golf, but traditionally it's more of a sport where historically excluded individuals don't feel as welcome playing golf. So next is career development, promotion, and salary inequities. And so inequalities. We talked about career development. That means you're not getting promoted. If you're not getting promoted, your salary is lower than your peers if you're in a historically excluded group. And then also a lack of support and or benefits for genders, sexual orientations, family situations, beliefs, disabilities, and neurodivergence. And so, I'm just scratching the surface on this, but, an example is if you don't have, let's say you have employees that are of the Muslim faith and you don't have a prayer room for them, and, really causes problems for them because that is their religion requires them to be into prayer a certain amount of time during the day. So there's all sorts of examples of this. And then finally, all of these items that I've discussed and even more, our panelists, I'm sure, we'll be talking about that, is that employees just don't feel comfortable or engaged at work. And, it's a moral imperative to be inclusive, but also a non-engaged employee is also not as productive as an engaged employee. All right, so with that, I'd like to introduce our panelists, which I'm so grateful that they were able to come, some at late notice due to the holidays. So Lola Adeyemo is the founder of EQI Mindset and is a team optimization and employee resource group consultant, speaker, and advocate focused on life sciences and biotechnology. She has an educational background in biochemistry and biotechnology, and prior to her work in consulting and speaking, she spent 13 years in various roles within operations, procurement, and DEI within organizations such as Thermo Fisher Scientific, Illumina, and Becton Dickinson. So welcome, Lola. Right. Next, we have Mark Drexler. He is the Vice President, Corporate Partnerships at HCC, which stands for Health Career Connections. And he is responsible for creating authentic and inclusive partnerships that change lives for all involved. He's first generation, and he's all about building the next generation of diverse and transformational leaders in our community. So welcome, Mark. Right, next, we have Candace Nordy, and she is a strategic planner, consultant, innovator, and executive trainer at Sloan Partners, executive director, and who serves as Sloan Partners executive director of diversity, equity, and inclusion. She guides and expands the company's programming designed to enhance opportunities for historically excluded candidates, and she manages Sloan Partners' DEI line of products and services. She also provides operational support for the company's Envision mentorship program, which connects students from underrepresented communities with accomplished professions in the life science industry. So welcome, Candace. Next, we have Ilyasha Pete, and she is the executive director of the Racial and Social Equity Initiative, and the overarching goal is to make space for historically excluded individuals in the life science industry. She previously worked at the Center for Excellence in Nonprofits, where she served as the Director of Diversity and Training and Consulting. Illy, as she goes by, is intrigued by partnering with leaders to create workspaces that foster a sense of belonging. She believes this is achieved in part by developing a more concrete understanding of intergroup relations and by dismantling current policies, practices, and hiring processes designed to interfere with the values of inclusion, diversity, equity, access, and liberation. So welcome, Illy. And so with that, Illy would like to discuss this slide before we jump into the questions.
Mary, I'd first like to say thank you so much for the introduction. Such a pleasure to be here and to be on the panel with such an amazing group of panelists. So thank you for that. Mary talked earlier about, some people call it DEI, some people call it whatever they call it. I am a firm believer in the ideal lens. It's called inclusion, diversity, equity, access, and liberation. We know that so many diversity efforts don't work. They don't last. And I think it's because we failed to include access and liberation. I'm going to do really short definitions. I already put them in the chat, but I think when you're talking about inclusion, you're talking about belonging, agency, and ownership. Diversity is how we make room for all the different ways that we identify. Equality is not equity. It's about getting people what they need. So I'm a proponent of equity. So equity is, I believe in equity. You have to get people what they need rather than equality. Access, it's an open door to information and decision making. And then liberation is freedom from oppression and allows you, or makes space for you to show up as your whole self. So that is what I think. And I'd love to hear in the chat what you think about that acronym and the way that I've broken it down.
Thank you so much. And I think that I put in the correct, I think you put it in the private chat, but I've included that. So thank you so much. Yes, equity and equality, I think a lot of organizations are moving to that. So let me make it so that we all can be seen better. So thank you so much, Ilyasha. I know California Life Sciences is very involved in this. So why does the biotech industry need to focus on ideal, Illy?
So I told you what it means to me, and I'm going to kind of expand on it and tell you what I think it means for the industry. I think right now the industry is very homogeneous, and we're not like the global majority. You know, within the next 10, 12, 15 years, people of color are going to have more of the jobs than the people that currently have them. And I think we have to make that shift. It's critical and important. And our goal is to be sure that people their voices, their ideas are heard. And that is how we expand the reach of what we do in the life sciences industry. So by including ideal in all that we do in every part of the structure of the organization, you uplift not only the people of color, but the people that you're trying to serve by bringing everyone to the table.
Thank you so much. And Candace, I know that you work in this area as well as part of Sloan Partners. So can you give us your take on why it's critically important for companies to build an inclusive workplace culture and what the key building blocks are?
Absolutely. Again, thank you, Mary, for having us today, and very honored to be among such amazing panelists. But I think where we're at right now, as far as why it's so important that we build inclusive workplace cultures, people have choices. If the great resignation or reevaluation, as they're calling it, has taught us anything, it's that people are making very different choices about how they work than they have in the past. And so when we think about creating an inclusive workplace, it really gives you a different look in the marketplace as far as attracting and retaining talent. It's a differentiator. And, I also think having an inclusive workplace is not just a recruiting tool, not just a retention tool, but it is absolutely a core value that every company should think about incorporating into their organization. Because when people feel like they are included, they feel respected, they feel like they belong, they feel like they can thrive, right? It's more than just like, I feel great here and, we have a great workplace culture. I mean, that's part of it. But even more so, it is about prioritizing inclusivity as a key component of workplace culture. And so quickly, to talk about some building blocks, there are lots of things about building an inclusive workplace culture, but I'll highlight a couple. One, I think it's really important to have leadership investment. Your leadership has to value being inclusive and model that. The other thing I think is important is you have to have training to help everyone at your organization understand, not just at a foundational level about inclusion, but if you're a leader, a manager, how do you create a team that has an inclusive climate? How do you create a team within a team, right? Because you have the whole organization and then you have your team. And you could have a very inclusive organization and have a team that has a very toxic climate when it relates to inclusivity. And then lastly, I'll say, it's really important to keep the conversation going and embed these temperature checks into your organization to really listen, being very empathetic and genuine around, are we getting it right? Does this workplace feel like a place where everyone can thrive, everyone's respected, everyone's valued? And the last thing I'll say is it has to be more than lip service. Your actions actually have to show that you actually care about inclusion. And it's an action. It's not this feel good thing, but it's an action.
Thank you so much. And in talking to Lola, I know that she feels strongly that the leadership needs to cascade down these feelings, as you're saying, Candace. So Lola, would you mind expounding on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And I've just enjoyed listening to everyone talk. But yeah, I think one of the gaps that I see is that ownership, especially in STEM, life science, and biotech. There's just this sort of divide, right? It's like we've got the technical folks and we got the people, and then we've got leaders, and then DEI sits somewhere, far away. And I just really believe strongly that we all have to come to that place where, okay, let's move beyond the talk, and everybody needs to be a part of inclusion, of building it. Every individual, every manager, every step of the process. That's what we're talking about when we talk about getting to a space of true inclusion. It's not the talk, and it's a process.
Can I add, Mary, to
Yeah.
what Lola said? I really feel like, too, that we have to start thinking, and she said it, but I'm going to expand on it. It's at every level of the organization, meaning from interns all the way up to boards and everyone in between. If there is anyone in the organization that isn't buying in, that isn't leaning in, that doesn't believe, it can destroy any ideal or DEI effort surrounding inclusion.
And if I could chime in also, it's about being an accountability partner. So that means from the CEO to the intern coming in with fresh ideas and different life experiences, all the way throughout the organization. The employees have to embrace disagreements and also be open to conversation. And that's how things get done and executed.
Yeah, thank you so much. And for those of you who haven't heard of it, the term is called performative diversity and inclusion. Some companies are more, they talk the talk, but they don't walk the walk. So Mark, I know that Health Career Connections has strategies to level the playing field. Would you like to tell us about that?
Absolutely. And thanks, Mary, for hosting and all the amazing panelists and everybody on this conversation today. It's not a Zoom meeting, it's a conversation. That's what we like to have at HCC. So we're a 30-year-old nonprofit headquartered in Oakland. Traditionally, we've been involved in the hospital side, healthcare delivery. I came on in September of 2020 to bring biotech, biopharma, life sciences, medtech, and also digital health opportunities to amazing college students from underrepresented communities. So one area that is really, really important is, working with executive sponsorship and talent acquisition. When recs go out, may they be permanent or interns, people look at the resume and the LinkedIn profile. How we level the playing field is when we produce candidates for our partners, like BioMarin, where we placed 18 interns last summer and are doing 30 to 40 this coming year, we tell a summary. We have a summary. Is the person first gen? Are they first gen college? What obstacles have they overcome to get to this point in their lives? Did they take care of siblings or grandparents? Did they do volunteer work? What's their family history? So it opens up an authentic view of the candidate rather than just a superficial view on someone who can really put together a great resume or LinkedIn profile. And we placed 391 summer interns, which was a record for us in 2021.
That is great, Mark. And I'm curious. So, are the requirements for the interns different than the requirements for when they're hiring? I mean, are they more open to historically excluded candidates, and are you able to manage that or have insight to if it affects their recruiting for other positions?
It's about educating the marketplace. Even though we're a 30-year-old nonprofit, unfortunately, there's quite a bit of implicit bias. And my job is to dismantle that along with the rest of our team. So when we look at intern positions, initially, some companies will put artificial constraints like PhDs and master's programs instead of looking at amazing underrepresented people who have different life experiences, who are sophomores, juniors, seniors, and recent graduates. So we talk through that during the discovery calls that I lead along with our implementation team. And then on the permanent side, we're building out an alumni virtual platform. Rather than just doing job postings, because everybody's inundated with that, we're going to release this hopefully in Q2, and we're going through implementation. And the AVP will allow companies to search our database of 4,200 alumni and some of our other partners and do searches on their own and reach out to those candidates who may not be familiar with those companies. And if you have big companies, they may have a big brand, but there's all these emerging companies that are pre-commercial who don't have access to those kinds of candidates or the bandwidth. So we're really excited about the AVP to balance and level the playing field.
That's awesome, Mark. And I think if one thing could come out of this panel, it's we get a few more companies to sign up with your program, because I think that sounds great. Going back to, people, we're talking about performative diversity and inclusion and, why companies may be doing it, because it's, it seems to be something that, a lot of companies are doing. So some jump on the bandwagon. But Illy, can you tell us about what companies have to gain or lose by not being inclusive or diverse?
So I can, and I think I'd really love to start out with talking about the challenges of this. And I think we get drawn into what has worked before, how it's been done, who has been doing it, all of those things, and we have to overcome that. We also have to think about intentional representation. And when we don't do that, that can be problematic as well. We have to be willing to hear people's authentic voice and tap into untapped resources and ideas that we haven't done before. And while doing this, all of this, and being intentional about it, we have to avoid tokenism. Because if you do that, it's a whole nother problem. And we have to partner with community organizations that are based and steeped in the community. That's how we start to get more people in life sciences. And I think when we don't do that, or when we don't do that, that creates a problem. We gain the ability to expand, to grow, to thrive, to be creative. So many things are lost. And, I was a consultant before I started this work. And I worked with an organization that was completely white board, completely white team members, and they served middle-aged white women. In 3 years, they diversified the board by 60%. The staff is now 75% diverse. The people they serve is a representation of the community, and they've more than tripled their budget, their operating budget. So I think we have to go well beyond the business case too. I think that we have to think about it being the right thing to do. So I think your reputation is at stake if you don't lean in. I think that companies that are wise and companies that are working to do what's best for the industry are going to be willing to make the shift.
Okay, thank you. What I'm seeing right now regarding work-life balance, there have been all these posts about how many women left the workforce because of COVID, and I'm still seeing companies requiring people to come into the office. I see job adverts. So what are your thoughts on, how COVID has changed? Just a general question. To me, it seems like a company that isn't willing to do that, it kind of says a lot about them. So does anyone have any insights on COVID and how that's...
I think I love what Haley was saying, because I think a lot of this is how we've done things, and challenges has really come out in the last 2 years. Conversations that people have been trying to have for years. Mm-hmm. Companies have been forced to have them now because they don't have a choice anymore. It's no more about trying to prove to them the business case. It's everybody is living it. You're living through it. And if your company is not on board, you are losing out, because people have choices and people are realizing that they have choices. So that's one of the beautiful things that have come out of this all, is the acceleration. And there's still work to do. But I love the fact that, you brought in parents and people that had to come to work through all of these and all the requirements that companies are making. When I was working, I was a part of starting the Working Parents ERG a couple of years ago. And the conversation at that time was like, well, ERGs are only supposed to be for the underrepresented groups, right? And so it was one of those things where it just exists for underrepresented groups to be together, so that we would, so when there's a little bit of performative action going on with that, is the conversation that, no, there's a voice here that is not being heard. And this voice is parents. Mm-hmm. We're not hearing it. That means we're not meeting their needs if we're not providing a space to hear what they need. And so now all of that is coming out. All of that is coming out is, if we're not doing these holistically, there's someone that is going to get left behind. So being able to think about that as a company is that we can't afford to be, casual about these anymore. We have to think about our entire process, and everybody has to be in it.
I'll just piggyback off that. It's interesting thinking back to your question about the pandemic. So 1 month before the pandemic, I got a promotion and also was a new mom. And almost everything that I asked for prior to the pandemic, I was told cannot be done. And then overnight, the pandemic hit, and everything that I had asked for magically appeared at the doorstep. And so I think thinking outside the box and listening and creating a workspace that's inclusive includes thinking about the impact of COVID on working parents, both men and women, and not just thinking about being more flexible. Or I love your idea of expanding the definition of employee resource groups to be a place for voice, not necessarily only for underrepresented groups. So Lola, thank you for expanding our definition of that. But I want to caution companies because in the remote hybrid environment and thinking about COVID, we also can reinforce gender stereotypes in that environment, because also what is true about COVID is that working moms are bearing the brunt of being caretakers, educators, and workers. And that's kind of on a stage. So, and dads too, but more women than men. And so we want to make sure that we don't reinforce those stereotypes that men can work longer hours remotely and that women can't because they have extra duties. So I think COVID, in some ways, it opened our eyes that we can shift and work different and be inclusive in different ways, but we want to be really careful about that. And later in the conversation, I'd love to be able to share about working remotely. Sloan Partners has been remote for 22 years. And so I feel like we've done a great job of building company culture remotely. But I'll save that for later.
Oh, you can. Yeah, I think it's a great segue because you had talked about how to make, I think you wanted to talk about how to make interviews more accessible. And so go ahead.
Sure. So quickly, and please, anyone on the panel jump in. Going back to that, we don't want COVID or the pandemic to also cause a way to discriminate or to cancel a candidate out. So one of the things we've been working on with our candidates is simple things like having a virtual background that's the same for every interviewee. Probably, Mark, you might do something like that with your students when they're going up for an internship. We don't want what's going on in the background to cause someone to have a bias against a particular candidate. So that's one thing that we can do. And we can prep them and we can work with them in their schedules and what they have going on. And we can all empathize with the doorbell that's going to ring because your groceries are being delivered. Or I had a workshop earlier and my dog was being groomed. And I thought, oh my, if she knocks on the door and I have to sign for this, it's going to be a problem. So I think it's important to remotely think about how you can continue to cultivate that inclusive environment. And Lola, I'd love to hear your thoughts because you helped me a little bit. We have culture clubs at Sloan Partners, and I was like, that's not an ERG. And Lola was like, yes, it can be an ERG. And so I think one other thing to think about if your company is remote and or hybrid or moving that way is how can you create culture clubs or ERGs or affinity groups in the remote environment.
So one of the things that, Candace, love your thoughts, and I'm going to build on them just a little bit. I have worked with organizations that are doing dance parties. They're doing hangman. They're doing cocktails. They're doing what is it called? Hide and seek in a way. It's very interesting. And I know an organization that had a get together, and they all took pictures with a goat. I mean, so there are definitely ways to do it. You just have to be creative and committed to it. Culture can be created even online. And one of the things I used to always say is that you have to create a culture or one may emerge and you might not like it. So I believe in creating the culture that you that you want within your organization. So love the ideas that both of you had on that.
Ellie, you're right. Oh, sorry, Mark, go ahead.
Okay, and excuse me. And so in the sports world, GOAT stands for greatest of all time. So,
I do know that.
So, Jerry Rice, Ronnie Lott, so I just wanted to throw that out there. But I wanted to just amplify both of your comments and Lola's as well from the previous conversation is we're finding with the college students, they have been sequestered for 2 years and haven't had a lot of interaction, and go back to your early to mid 20s and how things can be awkward and not being as bold when you're experienced. So this year, starting in February 1st, we're having a 30-day boot camp. So we have 3,000 applicants who complete our arduous process, the application and statement of purpose. And then we select candidates and go through interviews and everything else. The people who make that, roughly 500, will go through a 30-day boot camp about their background, how to dress on a Zoom call, but also skill building and how to have a stellar LinkedIn profile, resume, but also feeling comfortable telling their story. Because many people that are first gen want to assimilate or blend in so they can get their next job, but their story is what's going to differentiate them in the life sciences and working through our host organizations and internally within HCC. So we're really anxious to see how that's going to play out and what kind of results and outcomes that we can report to everybody in the future.
Mark,
That's
that sounds
great.
amazing.
Yeah.
So, Mark, how long does it take for a company to get started with you? Just sign on the dotted line, and then to actually get their interns in house.
So the dotted line is the easy part. It's about alignment. So initially, it's a discovery call with me. Sometimes our CEO, maybe I bring in other members. If it's someone in the Boston area, I may bring in Katie, for example, our regional director, just so they have a local flavor. But the discovery call is basically introduction, strategic initiatives of the company, and then an overview of HCC. And it's a 30-minute conversation to see if there's alignment, because we don't want to place candidates as a national nonprofit. Reputation and credibility is important, but just to place a candidate, just to have a candidate there, we want to put them in a position to succeed. So it's my call to see if there's alignment. And then within 24 hours, I send a recap with some documents, and then we start the conversations and go forward from there. The contract's easy. In full transparency, many HR departments want to do their own thing, but they can do better. And our goal is to we have a program fee of $5,000 per intern, and then the intern gets paid market rate, which generally in the States, it's $20 to $25 an hour for an undergraduate. So we want them to have not only a great experience, and we work on implementation, but also that they're paid, beyond $15 an hour. These are amazing students who are really striving and are hungry for opportunities. They don't want to apply like everybody else through a job board. They want to be able to tell their story, and that's what we can provide. So the whole process, basically from the discovery call to contract, can be 30 days. And we're definitely in implementation and in internship season now. So we're looking for more host organizations because the demand is huge with 3,000 candidates completing our process.
That is fantastic. And as Candace pointed out, and if you follow diversity and inclusion, there's a lot of people talking about unpaid internships and how that affects the historically excluded students the most. So I don't know if you had any other comments on that, Candace, and also to talk about the big subject of whether diversity and inclusion professionals that are not doing that full time, should they be paid? And I know what you all think about that, but go ahead, Candace.
Sure. And then when we finish that, I think a participant put a question in the chat that we should probably circle back to.
Okay.
But I definitely think that we need to pay interns because a lot of underrepresented students have to work. I got my first job as a freshman in high school. Had very supportive parents. We should not stereotype. 2-parent home, very supportive. But I had a lot of siblings, and I wanted to go out with my friends and put gas in my car, and my parents were like, well, you need to work. So it would have been difficult for me to take an internship non-paid and to be able to be a part of the sports and activities. So I think it's a real game changer when organizations can commit to paying internships. In terms of the question about should we pay underrepresented people who are leading DE&I or IDEA in the workplace, Absolutely, we should. We should either pay them, or we need to create someone who can take that on, if not full time, as much as they can. Or we need to all step up and realize that diversity is everyone's responsibility, and the onus should not be on, in particular, people of color or women or other marginalized groups. And so I think there's ways that you can get around it if you don't have that budget, or you can't dedicate a person to that. But I also think, we put our money where there's value. And so if you can't do that internally, you need to hire an external consultant to help do that work. So
the other thing that I would say, Candace, to add to that is maybe you don't have the budget, but we always have time. You could provide time off. There are many ways to lean in to show appreciation for that. And I'm a big advocate for ERGs. I have also seen ERGs blow up when there isn't a structure behind it. If you look in the chat, I said earlier, it's so important that there's a structure and there is a way for change to be facilitated. That's something that I'm like I said, a big proponent of, and it's something that we're working on, that we've done at California Life Sciences. The work that we're talking about, all of us, it's work that we're doing within our own organizations. We are not there yet. We are all striving to get there, but it's about taking one step at a time to move forward.
Okay. And if I could just add to everybody's comments, it's about the paid internships. So when we get involved in implementation, and this is why alignment is so important, we talk about deliverables. So many internships have projects. They may have, we want to expose the interns to our executives. That's all well and good, but you have to have a deliverable. So in case, if it's a 10 or 12-week internship during a summer, for example, we advise, let's say week 9, that the intern will present not only to the hiring manager, but the team, and also at least one member of the executive team, what their project was. It's a living, breathing document. So when that intern maybe goes back to school or doesn't become an FTE, you have that deliverable, that document that you can move forward with the project, and everybody signs NDAs and everything else. And then we also talk about FTEs, because that's our ultimate goal. So out of 1,400 interns that were placed between 2018 and 2021, 72% converted to either an FTE, full-time employee, or they're in a year, or their internship was extended further. So it's not, internship's a great start. It's early career talent development, but we're looking at a broader, comprehensive picture along with our alumni virtual platform. And that's why alignment is everything with us at the Discovery Call.
And we're working with organizations now that are considering bringing in historically excluded individuals for internships that could be up to a year. Okay. They give them 9 months of training. The last 3 months they're on site. And then at the end of that time period, they're hired with a salary of $100,000, and they agree to send them back to school at no charge. I would like to see the biotech industry do that. I've seen it in some other organizations, but I think it's possible here too. And if there's anyone out there that's looking to partner with all of us on something like that, we would all be in to make sure that it worked, I'm sure. I haven't talked to any of them on panel, but I'm just throwing it out there.
Yeah, that's why we're here, to make connections. And in November of last year, Lola put together a fantastic panel about employee resource groups. So if you go to that link that's at the top of this chat, you can watch that video. But I just wanted to give Lola a chance to, speak up about employee resource groups if you had any more comments and suggestions about them.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I think when I got involved into consulting specifically for employee resource groups, it was because of the gap that I noticed within biotech, life science, biotech industry. And I saw employee resource group as that space for belonging, that space to start the process of building the gaps and, elevating voices within the companies that don't necessarily cross. most times. And so I was thinking more along the lines of startups, like starting new employee resource groups. But what I realized is the need is actually higher for companies that have had employee resource groups for decades. Is that developmental process of moving your ERG from just we have one to how are you supporting it? As Illy talked about, what is the structure? Where should you be? And a lot of times it becomes performative because people just say we have an ERG and that's it. And you do a checkbox next to that. Is how are you leveraging it? What is the growth path for your employee resource group members and leaders? How are you developing them? How are you rewarding them? Are you paying them? Are you giving them stock options? I've heard of stock options now. What are you doing to reward your ERGs? And then ERG is a part of DEI. So if you don't have a DEI strategy, you don't have a DEI team, and you think you have ERGs and you're good, that's already a wrong place to start from. So it's understanding that when we talk about DEI, there's so many facets to this, there's so many entry points, but it's something that we continue to talk about it, and it's good to have conversations like this because it's not a one and done thing that you say, I do this as a biotech company. There's a long way to go. And we have to continue to learn, to listen and learn and evolve our processes internally so that we can better serve the customers that we want to serve in our spaces.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lola. And I think, I've read a few books that made me realize nothing's going to change until there's systemic change. But, you could get depressed about that, or you could say, I'm just going to be positive and I'm going to, for example, when you go on an interview, you can just ask, do you have employee resource groups? Do you have D&I? And, just, 500 people asking that question when they interview, the company's going to start to say, we need these things because we all know we live in capitalism, but that there's a lot of good people that work at companies and a lot of companies that are doing a lot of good D&I work.
Mary, there's a question in the chat that's really interesting from Errol Watson. Do we have time to go back?
Yeah, sure. And we'll just open it up for the next, we wanted to have 5 minutes at the end just for closing, but please put your questions in the stage chat. And did you want to field that question, Ilyasha?
I can read it and then we can all take our stab at it. How can we have inclusion when I feel the organization refused to honor inclusion and take pleasure in dismissing employees who they personally do not like or have the power to do so? Okay, so I got lots to say on this one. I am really a disruptor, and I have worked for a large organization that I saw really mistreat people, and I had to go. I couldn't stay because every time I think there's a quote that says something to the effect of when you're silent, you're as bad as that person that's offending. They say it much more eloquently than I just did, but I just don't believe in being silent. I would definitely come to the forefront and say what I had to say as I was looking to go somewhere else, honestly. Anyone else?
Well, I think it touches upon when the person, Errol, says that they're dismissing employees they don't like, it's getting into that implicit bias or what is it, confirmation bias. You start to not like someone because possibly they're not similar to you. If anyone wants to talk about that, that's what I read from that question is they're being excluded.
I kind of agree with Illy, thinking about some cultures are really tough. And, that's why I share that I think having leadership buy-in and then buy-in at multiple levels of the organization is really critical, because when you don't have that, it's hard to, be a silo championing inclusion and diversity. So I think my recommendation would definitely be thinking about, is there an opportunity to work with like-minded people, like to create an ERG group, whether formal or informal, to really be able to have a safe space to talk about how you're feeling. And, people leave toxic culture sometimes. And so, I think, as I mentioned in my opening comments around why is it so critically important for companies to embrace inclusion, it's because people have choices and people are choosing much differently. To your point, people are coming to interviews asking, what is your company's commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion? And if you're not ready to answer that, and back it up and be genuine, it's likely that the top talent is going to move on somewhere else where they can see it and feel it. It's really going to be in the next, I believe, 3, 5, 7 years, the number one thing that people are looking for. And there's so much data around it's what millennials are thinking about, women, people of color. People want to know that they're going to work for a place that feels inclusive. We spend a lot of time at work. It needs to be a place where you feel safe, where you feel valued, respected, and that you belong.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I see we have 2 questions. Jacqueline asked, can you speak to reinforcement of toxic stereotypes and pressure to conform to them, i.e. managers encouraging employees to fit into those boxes, working longer hours, fitting into a mold?
So what I would say is that it's rough, as people, as women, as people of color, as those that have been historically excluded. There's a glass ceiling, right? And the thought is, I was always taught you work harder, you work longer, you do all the things more because you have to be 5 times as good as your counterpart. I think the new generation does not buy into that. And I feel like when there is a toxic environment, I think now is the time that you really have to step up and lean in and have courage to say, this is how I'm feeling. This is what's going on. How can we work to change this?
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think some of the Simone Biles and the tennis player that both took time off for their mental health. Can't remember the tennis player's name, but I'm really learning from the younger generation because they're not having any of this. And as you get older, you have a mortgage. And someone said that they're a green card holder, and so I do believe me, I know. I've stayed at jobs, but you got to think about your mental health, especially with COVID. And, these days it's easy to apply for jobs. It's easy to go on an interview. So I would just say, have your feelers out long before you just can't take it anymore. And it's not all in your head.
And organizations are dying to hire people now, literally.
Yeah. And I love, I think it was Candace that put time, talent, and energy. And sometimes it's just, what is the fight worth fighting by yourself? If you are observing, because, like getting the tone of some of the questions that are coming in, if you're observing something really going on at that organization, sometimes they're not really ready for a change. And you don't want to be the only voice killing yourself trying to drive that change. Sometimes you just have to step away. Other times, maybe you can find the support, you can find the space, the support organically to initiate change. Change can happen from within. And so I think one of the reasons why I focus on STEM companies is also that fact that, people used to say you join the company because they are doing good work. Well, every STEM company is doing good work. And leaders have to understand that it's not about your product being nice or saving the world. If I come to work every day and it sucks for me, I'm going to leave or I'm going to be stressed out. So it's not about what the company is doing. It's about my daily experience. And that's part of why I try to work with managers and teams, within functions, small groups. How can I, as a manager and my team, be more inclusive? How can I, as an individual, step into a space where I can drive change with the people that are with me? So it's, that sense of let's do it, and we can make a change wherever we are. We can make a difference is really how we're gonna, move forward.
I love that. Really quickly, Jacqueline, I want you to know that all of us on here are not dismissing the feeling of I have to stay. I'm the primary breadwinner for my family. And so, when that last situation happened and I was feeling like I couldn't be the mom I wanted to be, the wife I wanted to be, I had to step out and reach out and use my network and take a leap. But just know that every day, I know that, my family's counting on me. So I understand what you're saying wholeheartedly. And Lola, you're right. Starting with managers is really important because they're on the ground with the people. And I think they have the most impact. They're at the point of impact for change. You want to have a great CEO and leadership team, but they're not in it with the managers. And so training them and using your expertise to help them is really wonderful. So thank you.
And I wanted just to give a shout out to Blue Shield California. They have an initiative that may be able to help everybody look at, and I'm happy to make introductions. It's called the Blue Sky Initiative. It starts talking about mental and behavioral health, starting in high school all the way to adulthood. We partnered with them as HCC and placed 36 interns last summer. I'm going to do 50 plus this coming year. And the students did research on behavioral and mental health in selected community health centers that normally can't pay interns in selected counties in California, in all three parts of the state, northern, southern, and central. And then as part of that, HCC received a $500,000 grant. So that's, and we're scaling that and moving that forward. So please reach out to me. We can make introductions and get you connected with Blue Shield because they're one of the companies that are making statements but executing at the same time.
That's great. We only have 5 minutes left, and I know we all, everyone, most of you had an interest in doing a closing statement. So, so we start alphabetically with Candace.
By first name?
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's the teacher in me. So just a quick final thought, because I want to make sure everyone has a chance to speak. I think my biggest mantra is always don't stop at diversity, no matter where you are with your company. It's important. We want to not take our eye off of it, but don't stop at D. Invest in a full diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy, and really think about how you can move the needle beyond performative, take action, speak out. Diversity is a fact. You either have it or you don't, but inclusion is an act. Thank you.
Thank you. Illy?
So I would like to just say it's been wonderful to be on this panel. The discussion has been rich, and we really appreciate the questions. I want to leave you with a quote, and it's by James Baldwin. Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. Mm-hmm. I leave that with you and ask for you to be the person that starts to move that change and move the needle. Each one of us has the opportunity and the ability to facilitate change, either as a person of color or as a co-conspirator. And it takes all of us to move it together, to move change together. Thank you.
Thank you. Lola?
Thank you. That was beautiful. I think what I wanted to end with is the fact that I worked in supplier diversity in DEI analytics, and looking at the data, just doing the work with data, I was very, very overwhelmed. And I was one of those people that felt like, I can't really do anything. I can't do much. But the worst thing we can do is to be silent. Mm-hmm. I think each of us can make a difference in our own space in different ways, and also keep learning, just as I've learned from everybody on the panel today. And, I will do better. Each of us can own our spaces and own our voices. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Lola. Mark?
In closing, I appreciate everybody's thought-provoking comments. I'm taking them. I took lots of notes. I hope everybody else did too. And we have to lead by powerful example. Join our movement. And our movement is everybody on this panel and others that you know. It, as Warriors coach Steve Kerr says, strength in numbers. We can't do this alone. And, our goal is to create an authentic and inclusive partnership that changes lives for all involved. It's very rare that you can change one person's life and their trajectory. We can do that together. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you to everyone. And this is just the start of the conversation. Of course, all of our panelists are easy to find on LinkedIn. Their companies are as well, so follow them. And then those that are able to, I know Candace is on East Coast time. We'll have at the top of the hour in 1 minute, the sessions should open up, and we'll have tables there. You know, sometimes we get lots of people, sometimes not so much. So just keep an eye on it, and you can ask our panelists the questions that you have in these areas. So thank you all, and next month we'll be having a career fair with a diversity focus, and what that means is that we partner with different organizations all over the country, invite them, promote their opportunities, and hope to see you there. We still have openings for sponsorships as well. So I see that the sessions are open, so I will head over. I will probably be in the Q&A or the inclusion roundtable for general comments. All right, thank you all.